With my now inevitable segue into making UFO 50 content predominantly, at least for the time being, I need something for myself to tide me over while we all wait another couple months to actually enjoy the game. But without any game and having already made the general hype video, whatever could I discuss? I won't drag out the rhetorical questioning or sarcasm further. I plan to do a series discussing the various games that pique my interest from the collection in more serious depth. Despite not actually having any of the games, we have some video and screenshots to chew on for pretty much every game, so there's still a decent bit that we can analyze. So, I plan to look into these and analyze them as much as I can, and then provide some speculation of my own about what we might actually see in the final product. So, let's just get into it. Barbuta is the first game in the collection. It's an adventure platformer released in 1982 and directed by Eric Surki. Also notably got a specific feature in the Edge magazine article, giving significantly more information on the game than many of the other ones. To be a bit more precise though, it's a slow-paced dungeon explorer with the specific challenge of a trap-filled labyrinth. And given that it's been described as a test of patience, it being slow-paced certainly checks out. My first intuition, and probably most, is that it's going to be a Kaizo-type game, like Cat Mario or I Wanna Be the Guy. This seems to be supported further by the only video we have of the game, where our character steps on a completely normal block, only for it to be a pressure plate that activates a falling ceiling tile and instantly kills you. However, the aforementioned descriptions may kind of make me think otherwise. To elaborate, there's a couple of ways it being a slow-paced or a test of patience could actually play out. The obvious and more common way is just that it's going to be a pain in the ass to actually get through. It's going to take a while to activate all these traps, realize that this is there and that's there, so dodge here, etc, etc. Needless to say, the players of Kaizo games need a lot of patience, in a sense, to get through all the blatantly unfair platforming. However, the way that I hope it plays out and think it will is a lot different. While, in my hypothetical, you could still brute force it just like in Kaizo, due to limited lives, it isn't encouraged. Instead, you could and should pay strong attention to your surroundings and notice that tiles or some other factors potentially are specifically abnormal. For example, in the screenshot we have, you can see a couple of stone block tiles that look distinctly off. The top half is lacking the shininess that the others have. I'm unsure what the bottom one would do, but I do suspect that the top would just fall down if you stood under it. I wouldn't be surprised if the distinct lack of gameplay or screenshots is kind of to hide this potential gameplay element. But that's purely speculation, obviously, on my end. Regardless, that's about it in terms of how I suspect the genre plays out. As for some more specific details, first things first, the HUD. Arguably, the most notable is the eggs on the right, 6 of them. These have been confirmed to be the players' lives in the magazine, so you start with presumably 6. Maybe you can gain them back afterwards, we don't know. As for the left side, at the top you can see your cache. We know there's enemies in this game, which respawn with every entrance into the room, so it is possible that they provide money. And based on how one enemy is specifically described as unpredictable, it's, I think, reasonably possible that even with the respawning and thus ability to potentially farm them for money, they may not necessarily be worth the hassle sometimes, completely dependent on the person and the shop. Next is items, which the player seems to start with or easily acquire the sword, which I'd be surprised if it isn't for killing monsters. We don't know any other items for sure, although it's safe to assume there's 8 unique ones, at least, but it would be a reasonable guess that at least some of them could be obtained from the shop. And last but not least, what can only be assumed to be the map, an 8x8 grid totaling 64 unique rooms. It's not a huge map, but it's not small by any means either. You can see in the video, which is notably outdated, that the map isn't there, and if this is to be assumed to be very early into the game, it is possible you don't begin with the map, maybe acquiring it shortly after starting, or, and less likely in my eyes, there could have just not been a map in the game yet. And lastly about the map, we do see 2 unique points, one room being completely pink, one being empty besides a small pixel in the center. I assume this means that the pink area is where the player is, while the other has been explored, or if I'm to get speculatory, cleared maybe of a boss? Once again, purely speculation on that front though. I specifically point that out as a possibility because we don't see any other rooms that look the same, so it's possible or even likely that it's being distinctly loaded for some reason. Your track, though, for this game to not even show the map in full by default. Maybe there's an item that you can get or buy that removes enemies permanently, maybe deactivates traps as well from a room, and then the map is marked in that manner. I'm kind of just spitballing, but regardless, we can move on to the room analysis at this point. This is presumably the room at B5 if we're to treat the map in this manner of a grid. As previously mentioned, there's 2 stone tiles lacking a shiny top, which I suspect could be indicative of some traps of some sort. We also see 2 little green, almost dog-looking things to me. Kind of look like they're holding their hands out in front of them. Possibly statues, but I suspect they're more likely to be enemies of some sort based on the shared green X in front of them. I can only guess that standing in the X leads to death somehow. The main other notable thing is the blue ledges of some sort on the right. They seem very distinct, and I imagine have some sort of special property that we just can't know yet. Only guess is the commonplace platforming feature of crumbling platforms, which, to be fair, the magazine does mention collapsing ledges, but I don't really think this fits that mold. Maybe ice, based off it being blue? Who knows? Your guess is pretty much as good as mine. Almost done. I do want to look at the video before we start wrapping up, though, even if there isn't a lot of content to that video. Firstly, I personally think that the tile that our player steps onto is sharing that characteristic I mentioned earlier of the lack of a shiny top. But the graphics at the time were worse, and the lower quality due to terrible resolution certainly doesn't help. So it's kind of hard to tell. I don't think it has a shiny top, but that's just my point of view. Let me know if you agree or disagree. Secondly is actual visual of the egg respawning happening during the last frame before it gets covered by a different game. I do wonder if you respawn in that room, presumably at the start of the game, or if you just respawn within your own room. It's unclear as of now. Overall though, nothing too major, but I do feel strongly that that tile does confirm my speculations of how this game is liable to play. And finally, some scraps, mostly hazards that didn't make sense to mention elsewhere, all from the magazine. They mentioned bats hovering around a ladder with unpredictable movement, spikes are unsurprisingly in the game, the aforementioned collapsing ledges, and of course, acid drops. And on top of the enemies respawning, it seems like traps will as well, so you need to either memorize them or keep up the sight reading pretty actively. Lastly, and very familiarly to me, they note how if you take too long, whether this is per room or overall isn't really clear yet, a giant floating skull comes along which completely ends your run, which I can only assume means a game over, not just death. That aspect does make me wonder if some influence from something like Minute might be here, in the sense of a very strict timer that has a strong emphasis on learning a route and following it. And if so, I think a certain bet I made might be impossible. But with that, we've gone over pretty much everything we know about the very first game in the collection of UFO 50, Barbuda. In summary, I believe that this will be an adventure platformer which heavily emphasizes taking your time and looking before you leap, both literally and metaphorically. With plenty of variety of hazards, all that will always remain as an active threat. If you don't play carefully, you're liable to spend your limited amount of lives very quickly. But you shouldn't go too slowly either, since there's a time limit of some sort that will end your run if you take too long. So, either learn quick or die quick. That seems to be the motto of this game. But I want to hear from y'all as well. Do you think the main game player will play differently, or do you think there's going to be some different ideas for how mechanics may work? Regardless, feel free to mention them down below. Not surprisingly, I love discussing UFO 50 and basically every game within them, so I'd be happy to discuss it further. So, I hope you enjoyed. If you have any specific game you'd like me to touch on before release, let me know. Anyways, see you next time.